in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, she, her, and hers, and I'm the Senior Partnerships Manager here at AllVoices. Today, I'm very excited to welcome our next guest onto the interview series, Kim Blue. She is the Chief People Officer at OpenExchange. Kim, thank you so much for being here. If you want to share a little bit about yourself for our listeners, including your pronouns, and when you were younger, how did you answer the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Thank you so much, Christina, for the invite. I'm delighted to be with you. So, hello, everyone. My name is Kim Blue. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. As Christina mentioned, I am the Chief People Officer at OpenExchange, and it is a role that I take extremely seriously and I'm very passionate about. And I loved that you opened our conversation with what did I want to be when I grow up? Because the first thing that I will tell you is I did not want to be in HR. In fact, I didn't even know what HR was until well into my career. And so I think that it's interesting how we find ourselves in places that we never thought we wanted to be. When I was younger, I actually wanted to be a doctor. And I thought that that is what I was going to do. I was going to go to medical school and I was going to navigate my way through exactly what type of doctor that I wanted to be, and quickly got to undergrad. And the first course that I took that gave me pause around that was genetics. And so, if for anybody listening out there who is into the sciences, genetics is one that probably gives you some pause and makes you think.
Yep.
So, but quickly was able to pivot into something that ultimately was the best decision I ever could have made about my career. And it absolutely allowed me to be where I am today. And it's actually created this really reflective narrative that I often go back to around failure or the perception of failure and how we view it versus actually how it plays a positive role in our life. So that's part of like my overall story, and one that as a leader I'm becoming more comfortable being able to tell as a part of my vulnerability standards, because I believe that vulnerability is something that makes us all unique. And so when I tell my story, I'm very vulnerable about that.
I love that. I think vulnerability is really important, especially that model behavior from a leader as well in every kind of sense of the word. Asking a little bit more about your kind of story, what would you say defines you, Kim?
I would say that, so I have my own personal blueprint that I follow every day. And there are four aspects of it that are non negotiables. The first one is being in alignment with my values. The goal is to understand what's important to me, because once I understand that, that's how people are going to experience me. And it's also a little bit about what I expect back from people. And that really drives the framing of communication, conversation, expectations, outcomes. So if I'm operating in alignment with my values, and I say to you, Christina, one of the things you need to know about me is that I really value accountability and honesty and integrity. That means that I'm always going to be honest, even if it's something that is, critical feedback or something you may not want to hear, but I can't operate as authentically as I want if I'm not in alignment with my values. And so being in alignment with my values, not in opposition of them, right? I just mentioned vulnerability. Because I'm in alignment with my values, that always allows me to be vulnerable. So if I'm not getting something that I need to speak up about that. And I need to be intentional about saying, I'm having a hard time kind of coming forward or, delivering for you on this because I'm not feeling quite like I can be totally honest, or I'm not feeling quite like the accountability is really there. And I want to get some clarity, or I want to reset. And so that vulnerability encourages me to come to every stage that I'm a part of as authentic as possible. The vulnerability is also important because it allows me to draw very clear boundaries about what it is that I want to allow in and where I need to draw the lines for my own self-care, for my ability to operate in my most authentic self, for me to make sure that I'm adding value, for me to make sure that I'm prioritizing my personal values, but that I see the entire big picture. If I can't be my whole self, and if I am not operating from a full cup, then I can't give the way that I want to. And so those boundaries allow me to ask for what I need, right? Can I think about that? Or can I sit with that and let me get back to you? Or it's as simple as saying, you know what, I'm not the right person to be able to provide that to you, but let me get you someone who is, and let me make sure that they're going to be able to take care of you in a way that meets your needs, right? So those boundaries really allow you to stay grounded. And the three of those together round out how I show my self care, because self care is super important, not just as a leader, but I wear other hats, right? I am a mom. I am not just a human mom, right? I've got a fur baby as well. And so I've got two people who are looking to me for example, guidance, love, whatever it is that I need. And so if I've not been in alignment with my values, if I've not been vulnerable, if I've not exercised any boundaries, then my self care tank is low. And then I can't put out there what others may need from me. And so those are the things that I operate in every day. Now, let me be very clear. I don't get it right every day. Some days I sacrifice on my boundaries, or some days I'm teeter tottering on whether or not that's a value that I want to call attention to. Some of that has to do with psychological safety. Some of it is imposter syndrome. It's all of the things that we hear and read about. But every day, I know how I'm stepping into my world, the things that are expected of me, because I'm grounded in my own blueprint. And that's the thing that guides me, along with my intuition, which I would tell you is my superpower. It's the thing that never guides me or steers me wrong. It screams at me if I don't follow it. And that is what allows me to be vulnerable, because I'm sticking with my intuition, and I could not ask for a better foundation. And as a leader, it allows me to show up and really be intentional about how I'm making connections, building relationship, the way that I influence, how I'm understanding what are the needs of the organization when we talk about culture, and aligning the people strategy to the business strategy. So it's my blueprint plus my intuition, and that's really what makes me who I am.
I love that framework. And plus one, too, just setting those healthy boundaries. It's something that I'm continuing to work on, both professionally and personally as well. And just advocating for yourself. I think also as a leader at work as well, really modeling that behavior is important too. I'm sure you have many different priorities and projects that you are working on in a given time that need your attention. What would you say is your current problem that you're trying to solve?
Great question. So, as we look at the way the world is right now, right, we're entering year three of the pandemic,
Mhm.
and we are being very intentional about the how, right? We are thinking about what it is that we want to do. Do we want to return to work? Do we now want to have a hybrid working model, right?
Right.
But the question really is how? How do we get there? And it looks so different for everyone because of the way that work and life have now been integrated. So we have quickly shifted from work-life balance to integration. And what I mean by integration is that at any given moment, we know that 2 feet away from us, there is, second grade math happening, or caregiving that needs to take place, or, right, a pet that needs our love and care and attention. And how do we integrate that into the way that we live, work, and play? And right now it's more around work. And so I think what I'm trying to solve for is how we ground our culture in that being a foundation of saying, because we care so much about our people, and because we know that happy, healthy people come to work and they are energized to do their best work and contribute at their highest level. And
Mhm.
those contributions speak to creativity, to innovation, to new products, to new ideas. And those new ideas allow us to move forward in whatever way our company needs to, as we think about a product, but also our brand, our strategy. And then once those things create new opportunities, new products, right? That's what adds to our bottom line. Our bottom line is what's connected to shareholder value, and everybody understands the rest from there. But it all starts with our culture and our people. And so, how do we take those business priorities and make sure they are grounded in the culture, and making sure that our people feel valued and that they know that the things that they're contributing to have value, are meaningful, and allow them to still balance that live, work, play with the way that I want to be able to work and the way that I want to be able to play? How do we marry those two things? And I think it's one of those questions that is surfaced out of the Great Resignation that we're still trying to answer. There's so many questions that have come out of the Great Resignation, but as we look at what I will refer to as the Great Reinstatement, which is how do we step back into this thing? Because it's not a new normal, it's just what are we doing for the world of work and the future of work going forward, as we're reinstating our values, as we're reinstating our norms, as we're reinstating all of the ways that we were thinking. How are we doing that? And how does that touch base across our talent strategy, about retention, about employee morale, about our organizational values, right? So there's so much there. And really, culture is at the root of all of that. So that is how I'm thinking about starting at OE. And it all starts with the organization. How am I marrying the culture of who we are to the way that we want to advance, and our opportunity to really tell that story to our clients, to our partners, so that they understand we really are people first, and that the people really drive a lot of the way that they're going to experience us as an organization and a brand.
Absolutely. People are your greatest kind of assets to the organization. They're the ones day to day on the front lines, creating that company culture too. And it is intentional from a leadership and kind of company perspective as well. Earlier, you mentioned non negotiables for yourself. And I think part of that is also creating non negotiables for your team to set them up for success and make sure that they feel seen and heard and having that kind of grounded foundation together. I also saw you recently held a discussion around another kind of approach or framework called Appreciative Inquiry. For listeners who
Yes.
aren't as familiar, can you tell us a little bit more about that approach and perhaps an example so we can better understand that?
Absolutely. So one thing to know about me is that while I draw a lot from lived experience, because I don't think there's anything better, I am 100% absolutely hands down a nerd. Okay. I love academia. My master's degree is in organizational development, and I focus a lot on change management, leadership development, coaching, all of the components that I think not only make a good leader, but help you lead a team effectively. Part of that is group dynamics, and part of that is also understanding organizational behavior. And what I mean by that is how people show up in the workplace every day. What are the traits, characteristics that we see people demonstrate? And part of that is a culture of feedback. Part of that is how we communicate and how we make sure that we're bringing to the table all the opportunities to have conversations, whether they are positive or
Mhm.
whether we're looking at saying, I need to give you some critical or constructive feedback because it's going to help improve you. And so when I was in graduate school, part of what we talked about as we expanded on this topic of OD is what are the frameworks, right? Or what are the approaches for lay folks that we can bring awareness to that help us be better HR professionals or consultants or whatever our titling was. One of them was appreciative inquiry, and
Mhm.
I'll spare you all the background on who came up with the theory or how it became implemented into workplace behavior. But essentially, what AI says is that from an organizational standpoint, we want to address development gaps, any type of what we would refer to as maybe a weakness. And that's not a word that I use that often, but I will say it for the purposes of explaining this. So, development gaps, weaknesses, what we would know as threats if we were looking at a SWOT analysis, right? Anything that might have a more negative or less than positive connotation. And how do we, instead of going at it from that angle, how do we work with someone, leaders, individual contributors, partner consultants, to say, let's talk about what we have done really, really well.
Mhm.
And let's talk about why these things have worked for us. And when we start with our strengths and when we start with our opportunities, that allows us to set the stage to then go, what are the things that we think we should be doing that we're not doing? So
Mhm.
it's a different way to approach addressing the gaps, the development opportunities, and then even getting to a place to say, what are the potential barriers or roadblocks that could hinder us if we don't address some of the things that we're not doing as effectively, or if we don't introduce them into the way that we're working? And that gets into things like process, technology. Do we have the right people or talent strategy to align to this? So appreciative inquiry says we're already doing these things great. Let's keep doing them. At the same time, let's not undervalue or downplay the areas where we can focus on that are going to continue to keep doing these things better. But it all comes from assuming positive intent and a positive mindset. And so appreciative inquiry is also a really thoughtful way to know your audience and understand that we might need to bring up feedback or observations or anything in that approach that helps us say, it's not bad, or you know what, this is an opportunity because it's not allowing us to thrive the way that we want to. And a
Mhm.
lot of that, again, goes back to knowing your audience and really being intentional about when and how to use appreciative inquiry. I've used it successfully. I use it in anytime that I'm doing coaching, and I'm actually using it right now as I onboard. I mentioned at the top of our conversation
Yeah.
that I just started this role just over a month ago. And so in my discovery, and what I mean by discovery is in my one-on-ones with OE leaders and individual contributors, what I am saying to them is tell me what is working really well in the organization overall, either in your role, with your leader, with your team. And then I follow that up by saying, tell me some of the areas where we have an opportunity to really kind of focus in and spend the time deep diving to either bring in the right type of change or to add resources to ensure that we are making progress in that area. And then I follow that up by saying, what's my greatest opportunity as a leader to be able to support, provide partnership, better understand whatever the connected dots look like to get to that. So I'm asking what's working. I'm asking a little bit more about what we can do or where some areas where we haven't been able to make as great progress. That's the threats, that's the weakness, those are the gaps. And then I'm saying, what's my accountability back to that?
Mhm.
Said differently, this could look like a start, stop, continue model. So what are we doing really well that we want to continue doing? What are we not doing that we should be? And what's already in progress that we say we got to keep doing this because it allows us to, to be agile or flexible or whatever the case may be. So I think appreciative inquiry is one of those things that allows you to be really thoughtful. You don't have to use HR speak. It's just about facilitating a conversation, right? And it allows people to go, that was really valuable. And at the end of the day, as an HR leader, that is my goal, right? To add value to everything that I'm doing, especially if I'm looking to enable the business strategy and foster the success of leaders. You got to figure out a way to talk to them so it doesn't feel like them and me. It feels like us, right? That's what organization is all about.
I think that's so important. And I think this also relates to having that growth mindset coming into conversations with humility and empathy and compassion and assuming that positive intent. Because what you were saying in terms of folks thriving and also an organization thriving, that doesn't just mean you are surviving and you're getting just positive feedback. You need that critical feedback, see where those opportunities are for improvement as well. I know that a lot of organizations, which is really great to see, are really intentionally focusing on creating an equitable workplace and making sure that new employees who've been at the organization for a while, really feel included. In your experience, what is really important to ensure all employees at OpenExchange feel like they are part of that company culture?
It's a great question. And one of the things that I intend to spend some time with, we talk a lot about inclusion,
Mhm.
just, in in the real world, so to speak. And so I think it's really opportunistic to say, how do we have that conversation inside of the workplace? Because one of the things that's come out of this great resignation is this notion around burnout, which I'm excited. I hope we get a chance to talk about that in a little bit because
Yeah.
I'm excited. I think it's tied to a lot of what we're already talking about. But when we think about burnout and we think about giving employees a voice, the ability to create a psychologically safe space. And what I mean by that is, can we have the same conversations we're having in our peer groups or what we would call the virtual water cooler, right? Zoom or whatever your platform is that you may be utilizing, right? But can we take that virtual water cooler talk and bring that openly into the workplace and do so safely where people can express themselves, because it's not necessarily about agreeing, it's about respect, and it's about knowing that there's a safe space for me to be able to do that. And so when I think about the opportunity at OE, it's really saying, how do we pause and introduce this notion of inclusion is important, and it goes beyond just some of the things we see in society, right? So yes, we can be aligned to a cause. Yes, we want to make sure that we're creating that social connection and that organizational values align with the things that are important to people. But does everybody have the opportunity to speak up and use their voice? And are we looking at the ways that everyone can do that? Some folks are not super comfortable putting their voice out there in an open forum. Some people would rather write their thoughts out, or some people would rather have a platform where they can share, but they don't necessarily want to be the person that's identified with that. But it doesn't make it any less important. And so, how are we being thoughtful and diversifying the way that we give employees a voice? It goes a little bit to speak up culture. It certainly goes to inclusion. It really goes to how we as an organization stand in our values and say inclusion is a core value. We are comfortable with that. And are we saying that to our partners and making sure that they know we want to make sure that we're taking that into consideration? Because the other piece that I believe in as a leader and as a part of my own personal sort of HR strategy that I want to implement is around employee experience. And so employees can't have a fully inclusive experience if they don't feel that their voice has a place in the organization. And so, what are the tools and resources that we're looking at? How are we implementing spaces where like-minded folks can come, whether it's working parents or whether it is folks who are caregivers? Is it our veterans community? Whatever that may look like, and however we define that. And so I think that that is the way that I'm thinking about it for OE. And as I look at defining what our inclusion strategy is, helping to start certainly at the top, because the tone at the top is very important, and then really driving that down into the organization.
The tone from the top is so important. And I appreciate that you've mentioned psychological safety. That's something that we definitely believe in at All Voices as well, in terms of really actively cultivating that. And part of creating this kind of environment of inclusion, feel like you belong, is your relationship with your manager. You might not be talking to the CEO of the organization every day, probably not, but you are engaging with your manager on a pretty regular basis, and across social media, across different articles, there's a lot of content around how not everybody needs to be a manager in their career and manage people. You could continue to be a individual contributor, and how to handle bad managers. There's a lot of kind of, buzz around that as well. I want to ask, from your experience, how do you prevent this from an individual side and also a company perspective, in terms of perhaps quote unquote bad managers or ill-equipped managers?
So I think manager excellence, as I will refer to it, or manager capability, is something that, and again, a lot of this has come out through the pandemic because we've had to shift so much of the way that we've worked. And so, how do you manage virtually when you're so used to engaging with people in certain spaces? Because in person allows for a lot of things that can't necessarily be conveyed in this type of format. And people were also dealing with their own, um, you know, issues, concerns, life dealings, as they got accustomed to, at the time, the new normal versus now, this is the way that we are living and working and playing. And so I think there has to be a prioritization of how are we really getting our arms around our managers? Are we having the conversations with them around what it is that they need and what our expectations are of managers in the organization? Sometimes we get to a place where we don't feel comfortable saying that.
Mhm.
Certainly, nobody wants to ruffle feathers or rub anyone the wrong way. However, in not having the conversation, we're advocating for a certain level of behavior that may not be in service to the organization. And when we do that, we don't hold folks accountable for how they're showing up, because then that impacts someone else's employee experience. And then that is what creates this whole notion of, do we have a psychologically safe culture for someone to speak up? So it's all iterative and it's all, connected. I think spending the time really getting clear on what are the manager capabilities that we need? What are we seeing? And then how do we need to either improve upon that, or what are the things that we want to prioritize? Often, what I feel like is leaders or organizations want to boil the ocean. It's impossible. What we have to get comfortable with are, here are the pots, right? We got a saucepan, we got a Dutch oven, and we got a quart pan, right? Put the water in the pots that we need. So, do we need to work on communication, critical thinking, accountability? If that's the thing that we're focusing on, great. Quality of executing those over quantity of saying we had 10 attributes that we want to focus on. Nope, we may have 10 over 3 years, but for Q1 and 2 and 3, we're only focusing on this: education, implementation, execution in that part of that is inclusive of maintenance and sustainability. So how do we look to do that? And then for companies who may have a baked performance management approach, right? How do we then hold folks accountable for that and saying this is part of just the management cycle? If you want to manage people, you have to be doing these things. And if you're not doing these things, then we need to think about whether or not people management is the best way for you to contribute to the organization, or is there a better suited role for you? And people are afraid to have those conversations. It's a very fair question to be able to ask, because how do you know someone's not thinking about it anyway? How do you know you're not creating an opportunity for someone to say, I struggle with communication, or you know what? Accountability is a place where I feel like I'm just not thriving and I need to really do some work there. It's all about allowing people to have their own roadmaps and blueprints to success, but we have to be having these conversations to do that. And it starts with, right, that organizational vulnerability. So how are we doing, or what are the things we're going to do? And then being able to put quantifiable metrics in place to define what success looks like. How will we know this is working? What does good look like, right? I talked about that this morning in my talk with Appreciative Inquiry. But what does good look like? You have to define that for yourself. And when you don't, that's when those inconsistencies in behavior and the way we're showing up happen. And I think that that deters people to say, well, I'm just going to do it the best way that I know how, or I'm going to manage the way I was managed, which is not always the right thing to do. So.
Yes, absolutely. And I do want to touch on your point about not boiling the ocean, really prioritizing things. If everything is a priority at the end of the day, nothing is a priority and you're stretched really thin. We kind of touched on burnout a little bit, but I do want to ask around, burnout in every sense of the word, not just at work, but we talked about being a full person outside of work as well. You might be a caretaker, you might be a working parent, you might have all these other responsibilities. And I want to ask, with this whole meld of work and life, blend, what kind of tools do you provide to your kind of teams to proactively address burnout as well?
A great question. And so I am in the amazing space of being able to look at all of the things
Yeah.
that the organization has currently, and then have been asked to make recommendations around what do we need? What would make us better? And how are we supporting that? And one of the first things that I think we start with is what's the organizational rhythm? When are we the most busy? And when we're not in those busy times, how are we nurturing our people? What things are in place? And so I think it starts with looking at benefits offerings. Oftentimes, benefits are one of those things that are there for us to lean into when we need them, but we're not thinking about them when we don't, because it's so regaled to, I have a doctor's appointment, I have a dentist appointment, I've got to, take care of my flu shot, whatever the case may be. And so there are benefits to support that. In between all of those, how are we spending more time or prioritizing the conversation around mental health? And how are we really taking the opportunity to say, it's so important that we have conversations with our benefits partners, no matter where we are, to talk about making this more of something we want to include in the way that we think about our benefits or the way we structure our offerings. And so I'm in the process of looking at what we have to offer currently, and evaluating, is our EAP as robust as we want it to be? Do we have the right communication channels in place to ensure that all of these things are there? One of the things that I think is really great with avoiding burnout that I've just recently learned about at our organization. And I'm so excited because it's tied to our ESG efforts, which our CEO just spoke about a day or two ago. And I had the pleasure of watching him speak about that. And so when we talk about environmental and social and the governance component of that and how we do that, the social part of it and the environmental part of it really goes into this whole notion of self-care, the people aspect of it, the culture aspect of it. And so how are we tying the social part back to our benefits and looking at the offerings that are in place? And so I just learned about a really awesome program that we have through our benefits that allows our employees to integrate their current fitness devices. So if it's an Apple Watch, if it's a Fitbit, whatever it is that you use, you can integrate it into this platform that additionally helps you track and identify what you want your wellness scope to be. And as long as you are meeting your predetermined deliverables around how many steps I'm taking, if I'm walking, if I'm standing, eating healthy, whatever it is, you can then be incentivized and get rewarded and receive, funds back, to be able to say, and now I can reward myself in a different way, whether it's with, a new piece of fitness equipment, or jumping into therapy, or being able to now download these new apps that are available to us. And so we're now looking at implementing this in a way that is really intentional. So when employees become off peak or the busy time for us, how are we marketing and communicating this and saying, you don't, it's right there in front of you. It's provided through our benefits. It's at no cost. And in fact, there are a lot of returns on the investment you make in yourself. And I think that that's the best thing because it's already right there. And so I'm starting to facilitate conversations between our in-house benefits lead and our ESG team and this outside partner. So it's a great way to just bring all of that together and remind folks that we want them to take advantage of their time. The other thing that we are really instrumental in doing is encouraging people to take their time off. This year, I had the pleasure of looking at our global holiday calendar and making decisions around saying we want to implement these things, and where they've been specific to one region, we're going to make that a global decision. So no matter where you are, you get that time, and we're going to respect the things globally that everybody needs to do because there's different cultures that we need to be mindful of. But no matter what, we're going to reinforce folks and say, you know what, we're going to make this day a floater so everybody can have a long weekend. Or we're going to be intentional about saying, empower your leaders to help your teams manage their time and help encourage them to say, you know what, let's everybody, you know, in their day by a certain time, right? If that's the thing that we all can agree on, if it's in service to the people and in service to the business. So it's really getting innovative with that, and then looking internally at what already exists and how we can bring light and visibility to that. And so those are the two things that I've started with, which is what's something that we can all do in-house through our benefits, because we have to look at that every day anyway. And how are we thinking about leveraging our holidays and really playing up our time off and saying, hey, we've got a long weekend. What are the things that we can do to support our employees really being able to take their time? And how are we committing to that from a business standpoint first, and then reinforcing that to prioritize the people? I'd say the last thing is encouraging our leadership team to demonstrate the same behavior that we want to encourage, right? Because again, just like the tone at the top is important, people will model the behavior they see their leadership doing. So I think that that's, yes, I think that that's key importance.
Taking that time is really important. Investing in yourself, like you were talking about, and also looking at things being innovative, like benefits. I think if this past almost, three years has taught us anything, is that business as usual is not going to cut it. There is an opportunity to improve in most areas as well. And taking a look at that, I do want to ask, there are a lot of things that people are doing from a company perspective that are really innovative in the people space. Is there something that you're most excited by, and why?
I would probably say the thing that I am most excited by is the ability to build. One thing about OpenExchange is that the team saw a lot of growth last year on the business side. And because of that, that really brought out the opportunity to say, we need a people leader to come in and help us think more about how we actually take care of our folks and how we really start to create a culture and evolve our culture, but then also be a model to other companies who may be looking at, when I start, I want to be able to aspire to this because this really works, or these are the things that our organizational values really encompass in our people. And so I get the opportunity to build a team that really aligns to the business and can do three really important things. We can be ambassadors for our product and our business. We can speak intelligently about that product and business without having our business teams right alongside us. And then I get the great pleasure of really defining for us, when we think about human resources, what do we want to be known as? How do we want to be branded? How do we want to sort of move away from this sort of antiquated definition of HR, which is, the principal's office, or you only go to HR when you're in trouble, right? I get the chance to brand and build and really foundationalize who we are, why we are credible partners and assets to the business. And so that's the thing that gives me energy every single day. I am a builder by nature. And I think the fact that I get to do it alongside really thoughtful and intentional leaders who believe in our product, but most importantly, they believe in our people, that is huge. And so I know that might seem like a non-traditional answer, but when you get to build something that is really meaningful, that you know is going to leave an impact on the future of work and blaze a trail for anybody coming behind me, right, to do it better and bigger. And I hope somebody does when it's time for me to step aside and hand over my seat to the next great HR leader, right? I hope that I build enough of a great foundation where they can just take it and soar, right? That's the thing that gives me energy and it's exciting. So it's really about building this team and really about enhancing the culture that I'm excited about.
That's a big question. What does human resources people want to be known for? What do you want to be known for as well? And just having the opportunity to build. It's exciting. It's exciting because it is
Yes.
an opportunity for change and do things differently. In terms of leaders, I know we talked a lot about kind of thinking about those big questions, really actively listening, getting that critical feedback. Is there a must-have that leaders need to be successful in the future from your perspective?
Oh, I love this question. Yes. And I wish we could probably do a whole separate
Oh, for
podcast on
sure.
this for sure. But I think when we talk about those critical must haves that leaders need to be successful, three things, hands down. You have to be an active listener. If
Mhm.
you are not plugged in to what it is that your people are saying they need, they want, or is going on, you run the risk of missing out on really easy, accessible information that is going to inform how you need to move as a leader. So you have to be an active listener. And that really stems from communication. But I want to call that out and saying, as much as we talk, you kind of have to shut up and listen a little bit as well, right? There's just as much importance there. So active listening is one. I think vulnerability is another one. It is a part of my personal blueprint, but I would put it out there to say you have to show people who you are first. Yes, you're a leader. Yes, you're this title. Yes, you sit at this level in the organization, but who are you outside of that? I tell people all the time, right? I am somebody's mom, both human and fur,
Yeah.
right? I am a daughter. I'm a granddaughter, right? I am a fellow HR industry colleague. I am a Black woman, right? And so I wear that hat of somebody who comes with all of the things it means to be a Black woman when we think about that. I am a member of corporate America.
Mhm.
I am a reader. I am a yogi. I believe in health and wellness, right? I am an advocate for so many things. And so all of that makes up who I am. So you have to humanize yourself a little bit. And that's what that vulnerability is. I've talked in past conversations about humanizing HR, but you have to humanize yourself outside of your title and your role. Because if people perceive you to be this big thing, they may find that they can't come and talk to you on a certain
Right.
level. And that's not exactly. And that's not what you want. You want to be accessible to the CEO, just like you're accessible to your team on any level. To me, there's no differentiation there. So you have to be an active listener. You have to make sure that you're being vulnerable and humanizing yourself a little bit so that people feel like they can connect with you. And then the third thing is you have to really prioritize what it is that you believe in and bring that authenticity into your leadership style every day. And so, said in a more succinct manner, right, is that you have to get clear on what your leader philosophy is. Oftentimes, we align to something because it's already in place. We will do what was done before us. We will lead the way that we have led. But is that authentic to you? If not, you're going to have this internal struggle with, I kind of believe in that, but it's really not my jam. Or, you'll say yes in one way, but in another conversation, you might say, it's not really the thing that I believe in or my philosophy. And so that creates a disconnect, and you're always on the fence between that. And that's how people will experience you. So you got to get super clear on what your leader philosophy is. People ask me, what's my leadership style? I'm super prescriptive about saying immediately, I'm a servant leader. I'm here for the people. I'm here for the organization. And I believe in transformation. If you can't answer that question in the first 10 seconds, right? You have not honed in on your leader philosophy. And then it's not going to allow you to be authentic. And then you can't humanize yourself, right? And let people relate to you on levels outside of your title. And I think that puts leaders at a disadvantage. So those would be the three things I would say. all leaders need right now, and as a leader in whatever stage of their career they're in to be successful.
That human element is so important. You're more than your role in the company that you work at, as well as just a call to action too. Kim, we've
Yes.
talked about a lot in this interview, but is there anything I didn't ask that you want to share, or a key takeaway you want to reemphasize for folks listening that you hope they bring with them after hearing our conversation?
Yeah, I think the thing that I would reemphasize is always work in alignment with your values. There is nothing wrong with being able to say, this isn't for me, or you know what, this doesn't speak to me, or this doesn't resonate with me. Being able to choose yourself is never a bad choice. And I think as long as you're clear on your values, you're grounded in what your yeses are, because for every yes, that comes with a no, right? And sometimes that no is to you in a place like self care, in a place like a boundary. And so always work in alignment with your values, not in opposition with them. That will always make you a more happy, healthy human. And
Mhm.
that's what this world is all about, right? Showing up to your work, showing up to the passions that you have, whole, happy, and healthy, and not putting those in a position to not get the best of you because they mean so much to you and you want to put everything that you have into that.
I love that. And I think that also relates to setting those healthy boundaries as well. With every yes comes a no. Kim, thank you so much for being on Reimagining Company Culture this afternoon. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you so much for having me, Christina.
Of course, and as a reminder for folks who are listening at AllVoices, we really believe that employee feedback management as a requirement for the company to succeed overall. Have a great rest of your afternoon, everyone.